Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I'm sorry we didn't do it before.
Yeah, I had a thing where I was like, oh, I'll try to record, and then it said you have to have the host give you permission, and I was like, oh, I don't want to interrupt, but we got part of it recorded, so.
Yeah, and someone else will have recorded. I've done this very talk. I mean, it's always a little different, but I've done it for a couple clubs, and someone has probably recorded it, and I know that someone has recorded my queen raising talk.
Okay, awesome. You may resume whenever you're ready with wherever we left off, which I think was.
Oh, I have to be enabled to share the screen again.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes, let me do that again. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm the one whose computer died.
Okay. Okay, you should be able to share now.
All right, cool. All right. Where were we? We were somewhere in the middle of Virgin Queen mayhem. Was it? Yeah. Did you all see this slide?
Yes.
Yes.
We're like 2 after this one.
Cool. Here we go. Yay. All right. So little tiny can opener. That's one of my favorite parts, actually, with the little flap coming down. So here we are. We've got a clean circle and a tiny flap of wax. There's one. Here's another one. Bunch of them in this one. Bunch of these virgins have emerged. Sometimes a hive will have a prime swarm and then numerous cast swarms after that. The most I've ever seen in a single colony in one season was 9 cast swarms. And sometimes it's from the same batch of virgins, and sometimes they make cells that are of successive ages. It's almost like they choose waves of queens. So you'll see queens that are 10 days old inside the cell, and queens that are 7, and queens that are 5, and queens that are 2, all in a row. And it's maybe some type of genetic, guarantee mechanism for survival. I'm not exactly sure why some colonies do it and others don't. But definitely a lot of mysteries to find out about by opening queen cells. Horrible though it may seem. Here's a close-up of the end of the cell. All right, so moral of the virgin queen story is look for the virgin queen if you must, if you really want to. She'll move faster than a mated queen. Be very attentive. She'll be small and triangular looking. Her thorax remains the same size throughout her life, so the thorax will be quite notably large. And her abdomen should be more triangular than that of a mated queen. But the wings should also still look different than a worker bee, and she'll move a little bit differently, and she'll also appear, someone recently on social media I saw said something about a queen's legs, how she always notices the legs. And I was like, you know what, that is absolutely true. Their legs are so beefy and powerful, even the virgins, and you can really see it in the legs, how they move around. But with virgins, I rarely look for them unless I have to. Because they're flighty, they're going to be running all over the place, they're going to be on the wall, like none of the tricks I just taught you about are going to work at all. And it'll be all over the place. You'll find her in your pocket 3 hours later. It's hard. So once you've done all of this looking, you can assess your situation. A couple of options. Your hive could be queen right and healthy, or there could be something wrong. Hive could be sick, the queen could be old, they could be superseding. They could be queenless but salvageable. They could have a virgin queen, they could have queen cells. They could have laying workers, they could have a drone layer. These are all a couple new words that I'm throwing into the mix while reviewing some of the other ones. So, how to assess your situation. If you see a frame that looks like this, on this frame you'll see quite a few of the bees on this frame are drones. There's a lot of drones on this frame. Look at it for a couple seconds. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can count at least 50 just right here. The only capped brood remaining in the colony is drone brood. So this is where you see a turning point. If a colony, it's good, especially if you want to be treatment free or if you want to minimize treatments. You can give them a break in the brood cycle. So you want to see most of the capped brood gone if you're going for that. So this is a good situation to be in, but this is also the turning point where you may start to develop laying workers. So if a colony has gone this long and that they have this many drones and they don't have a laying queen yet, you're going to start to be on the lookout for laying workers. When this capped brood disappears, then you're really in laying worker territory. This one, if you look at this is more than 90% drones. This is all drones on this frame. So either you have a booming colony that just has boatloads of drones, which is awesome, and I'm like kind of jealous, or you most likely have a hopelessly queenless hive, either from laying workers or from a drone layer or something else like that. So laying workers, this is what it looks like. You go into the hive, you look inside a cell, there's like 5, 6 eggs, they're all piled up, they're on the side. There can be varying degrees of this, right? So you can have a laying worker that's very messy with like 6, 8 eggs in a cell, or you can have a laying worker that you're just like, you know, these eggs are not all facing the same direction. They're kind of all facing different directions, you know, or maybe they're not quite in the center at the bottom of the cell like this one. Maybe they're like kind of just a little off kilter. And when it's a queen and she's healthy and they're on a flow and she's laying well, they're usually facing mostly the same direction. And they're standing up vertically at the center of the bottom of the cell. So, you know, laying workers would be multiple eggs. The symptoms: sideways eggs. They're little butts. They don't reach all the way to the bottom. So they just kind of like drop the egg and it goes in any which way. They might have a poor laying pattern. And there's usually, when people say laying worker, they think of it as singular. Often there's quite a few of them. And there may even be factions, who knows? Like, and I've seen them eat eggs. I've seen workers eat queen eggs, and I'm guessing that the other workers probably eat the laying worker eggs sometimes too. And I wonder if maybe that sometimes contributes to being, you know, the pattern being all crazy. I don't know if it's competitive or cleanup or what. I don't even really know for sure that it happens, but I've seen them eat the queen eggs. All right. So, oh my gosh, I need a queen, take 2. Here we are, back at the beginning with Chewbacca. We're freaking out. We think we might actually need a queen. So, options. What do? You could combine with a queen-right colony. Combining with a queen-right colony is always an option. If you have, I always recommend that people start with at least 2 colonies. So if you aren't sure, the only time you don't really want to combine with a queen-right colony is if you have a virgin, unless you don't care and you like, you know, you want to watch the show and see who wins. It's always an option. A lot of people combining for winter on a commercial scale don't check for queens. They just combine and they figure the queens will work it out. So you could combine, or you could let the bees raise a queen with the resources that they have. Or if they don't have enough resources, you could provide resources for the bees to raise a queen. I'm getting tired. All right, do they have the resources? How do I know? Can I provide them? How long will it take? Is the hive weak? Are they sick? Are they mean? Do they have a lot of mites? Am I using appropriate genetics? What time of year is it? Here we are back at the beginning. It's asking a lot of philosophical and practical logistics questions. Making a decision about what to do once you've gathered the information isn't always that easy. It's always okay to close the hive back up and think about it before taking action, because oftentimes if you take action and you're not sure, it makes a bigger mess, especially with bees, because most of the time, unless they're on the verge of death, they're probably going to be fine without you. So, this hive does not have the resources that it takes to raise a queen. That's a joke too. This hive may or may not have enough resources. So it's a 10 frame deep. There are bees from the top covering approximately, in order to count as one whole frame covered by bees, it must have bees covering like 90% of both sides of the frame and the gap between the frames. This only has half. There's not that many bees on this side. So this is a half, this is a whole, this is a whole, this is a whole. This is like 3/4. So this is like maybe 4 frames of bees. And you haven't even looked at it from the bottom. You don't know how strong they are at the bottom of the frame. It's really easy to forget that. So you also need to look at them from the bottom and count the same amount of frames from the bottom. If there's only bees on one of these frames from the bottom, then they're not 4 frames strong. It's more like 2.5. If there's bees on the bottom of 3 or 4 of them, then they're probably 4 frames strong and they might be able to raise a queen. But it's still kind of touch and go. You don't want to let them raise their own queen if they don't have enough bees, because then they won't be able to nourish her properly and it won't be a quality queen that you come up with in the end. This hive definitely has enough resources to raise its own queen. It is like ready to go. You could probably raise like 5 queens from the amount of bees that are in this hive. All right. Oh, here. This was another joke setup, but I skipped it. All right. So if at the end of this, and you think about your options, you know, I'll go into those in more detail, and you decide that you still need help, you can call me up and try to get a queen, and I'll be out here smoking. Oh, and the next one was drinking. It was supposed to be smoking and drinking, and I was drinking a cup of queen bees in a beer glass. Anyway, jokes, lots of jokes. They're funnier in person, I swear. Like every time I try to tell these jokes on Zoom, I'm like, what am I even doing? But in all seriousness, you want to think about genetics. So what kind of queen do I want? What are my goals as a beekeeper? Where do I get her? And local survivors. So what are my goals as a beekeeper? Do I want to make honey? Do I live in a suburban yard? Do my neighbors have kids who are allergic to bees? Do I have to put the hives like right next to the fence because there's no other place in the yard? Do I live in a place with a cold winter? Do I live in a place with a very hot summer? Do we have a summer dearth? All of these questions will tell you more. I heard you talking about Russian stock a little bit, so I'm guessing if people are experimenting with Russian stock in the area, there's probably some times of dearth where the bees need to, show frugality and be able to make it through a time of limited resources or a time of a lot of rain or a time of drought without dying. So, just start to ask those questions. And generally, the bees that are going to do the best in your area are the bees that are already surviving in your area. There are some limitations to that, especially if you're dealing with strains that have scuttleotta influence. So if you have that, then your bees may be hot and you may get hot matings, and you're going to have to avoid using wild local survivors as breeding stock because of that. That's often the case in Florida. Up in New York, local survivors are like gold. If a hive makes it through the winter, I would happily graft from her in any kind of backyard beekeeping situation, or even for production on a commercial scale. So they come in different colors. Often Italians are associated with honey production, brood production, low swarming impulse, and gentleness. They generally look pretty blonde. This isn't the blondest queen. She's got the hint of a black tip, but she's pretty bright. So probably has some Italian influence. But also these color schemes, they can be all over the place. You can have someone who's raising carniolans and they can come out blonde. But then in theory, that's because they're mating with somebody's Italian bees. So, I don't know exactly how color fast all this is, like how are dark bees always carniolan or Russian, or light bees always Italian? Not 100% sure. But it can be kind of a little palette to guide you for figuring out what kind of qualities they might have. And also, it's just really pretty to see the different ways that they look. They can have, gentle stripes. They can have very dark stripes. They can be mostly dark. Sometimes they have these diamonds down their back or freckles on the side, and that's really pretty. That's not a queen bee. Okay, bugs in the mail. So I was going to also talk about catching them. I'll talk about that at the end. So who has... I can only see a couple of you, but if I was in person, I would have you raise your hands and tell me who has ever shipped a queen in the mail or received a queen in the mail. So you can just ask yourselves that privately. But it can be a little bit of a tricky thing. Oh, nice, priority live bees. I remember that story. That's awesome. The 3-hole cages are nice. You can fit a lot of attendants in them. And so they can last for a really long time in the 3-hole cages. You gotta ask yourself, do I want USPS or UPS? Recently, the USPS has been a little bit unreliable in some cases. I had 2 shipments get stuck in the mail for over a week last week. They all arrived alive, which was kind of incredible. But UPS is more reliable. For small numbers of queens, USPS is probably your go-to because UPS is very expensive.
USPS took 36 hours from Texas to get here in California. Okay. I'm quite impressed.
Yeah, it can be, it's touch and go. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. I was sending them from New York to Louisiana and then one to somewhere much closer, and they were both in the mail for over a week. It was crazy. So, holiday weekends, those are things to think about. If you're going to order queens in an envelope to come in USPS, it's generally worth it to pay for overnight, even if it doesn't get there overnight, because it'll get there sooner than the 2-day. Even though, so the 2 days usually about $8, and then the overnight is $26. And if you're buying one queen, I understand how that's not worth it, but if you're buying a couple, it's usually worth it. I like to only ship queens through USPS these days on Mondays and Tuesdays. if I start shipping them on Wednesdays, they will often be delayed and end up lost in the mail over the weekend. And that can be a problem because they're usually shipped in a cage with just candy with no water access, and they can't poop. If you're getting more queens, you'll get them with cover bees on the outside of the cages, and there will be candy and a sponge with water in it in there so that they could survive a week or more in that box, lost anywhere, as long as it's climate controlled. But with the tiny cages, it's tricky. You know, it can be up to a week. The 9-hole cages, the 3-hole cages with 9 attendants, they can go longer. There's more food and more room for their little bodies. But yeah, you know, these are like little logistical things. They're really important. So if you're ordering queens for the first time, like think about this stuff, you know, like remember your queen provider is probably dealing with a lot of questions, and they probably sell to people who order a lot more queens than you, depending on who you're ordering from. And it's good to like try to do your research as much as you can, get a sense of what you're looking for, introduction, like maybe, you know, try to watch someone else in your club introduce a queen, and then get a sense for it, and it won't feel quite as scary. So you want to think about the temperature. I check the weather, where I'm shipping from, and where I'm shipping to, almost every time I ship a queen. Location of the mailbox. Is your mailbox in the sun? Where does your mail carrier leave the mail? Will they leave it on the porch? Should you have it held for pickup at your local post office? There's often an option to do that and to give them a call. And at the end of the day, pickup is always preferred. Buying locally produced queens is always preferred, unless you want to bring in specific genetics, and then shipping can be really helpful. A lot of different cages. These are California minis. Can't fit a lot of attendants in those. This is a JZBZ battery box. I love these. They're great for storing queens. They'll protect the cages a little bit, but also provide ventilation and some shade. So they'll be shielded from light, and they can still breathe. And it's a large, hard object, so you're not going to like sit on her with your car keys, which I do all the time. So, you know, nice big box. It's really helpful. Again, we just saw one of these in one of the windows here, but people will often ship small amounts of queens in an envelope with holes punched in it around the sides, and the queen may be hot glued or taped to the envelope. And this works for the 3-hole cages and also the plastic JZBZ cages and just about anything you could think of. There's a lot of creative ways to use. Oh, I forgot video plays. This is so exciting. You're going to get to hear piping. I love that the video. Oh, darn it. Video's not playing. All right. Never mind. I got all excited. No, I don't want to go to YouTube. Go back. Oh my gosh. All right, here we are. So you can, you know, I used a box that was not even designed for the JZBZs, but I just taped them in place. As long as they're solid and not going anywhere, and they can breathe and they have enough resources, they'll be fine. If you're caring for queens before installing them, keep them in a cool, dark, well-ventilated place. Don't take that too literally. Don't put them directly in front of the air conditioning. Don't put them directly in front of the heater. Don't wrap them tightly in a sweater so that they stay warm, because they won't be able to breathe. Make sure they're ventilated, and make sure they're shielded from light. Don't ever let the direct sun hit them. Not even, like, if you're talking, you're having a conversation, you're like, I'll be standing here for 5 minutes. Next thing you know, you've been talking for 20 minutes and your queen cooked to death in the sun in your hand because you weren't looking. Like, make sure they're not in the sun. I think about it, like, when I have queens with me, I ask myself, are the queens in the sun like 5,000 times a day? So out of the sun, give them a drop of water once a day. It's a very delicate business, the drop of water. You don't want to give them more than a drop of water. I'm going to show you. I don't have a cage actually in front of me. I should start thinking of more Zoom props to like show things on Zoom, but you can I take the tip of my pinky finger and I put it in a cap, and then there's a drop of water that forms on the end of it. Right? I don't even know if you can see this from there, but you can see it. It's like it forms, and you just want to touch it to the cage, just like that. Just wipe it on the cage, and you want it to cling. Oh, nice! I love that little dropper. That's awesome. That's smart. Some people. Sorry, I'm kidding. I'm sure not all of you are looking at the screen I'm seeing right now, but you can smear it on there. You want to get it to cling to the gap in the cage, either the wire mesh of the 3-hole or the little plastic thing on the end of the JZBZ. you want to, if it rolls down the inside, it's just going to get the candy wet, and the bees could drown in the candy and die, and then not only be dead but also block the candy for the other ones with their dead bodies. So you definitely want to watch for that. The dropper for putting drops of water, that seems like a great plan. And then some people put a damp paper towel and they drape it over the tops. This works well with JZBZ cages. They drape it over the tops, and then the bees can suck the water that they want, but there's no dripping water anywhere. I thought that was just genius when I heard that for the first time. So always check the candy, especially if you're in a hive beetle prone area, if they've been in that cage for a while. If you have attendants in the cages, it's usually not a problem, but when the queen is alone in the cage, the hive beetles will lay eggs in the candy, and then the worms will hatch out in the candy and like take over the cage, and the queen will die of starvation. Interestingly, like they don't accost her, the worm. She dies, can't eat because they're in the candy. So anyway, get her in as fast as you can. This is a JZBZ plastic cage. These are a whole lot of JZBZ plastic cages being stored on orange bars, and so there's just one queen in each of these. They can be banked. I'm not going to get into the details of banking, but if anybody wants to know about banking queens, you can ask me questions. This is me with some 3-hole cages filled with virgins from Mike Palmer's. This is a California mini cage. Again, you can see not a lot of room for attendance. This is cages of old. Love these. You can make a cage. I like to show this just to remind people you can make a queen cage out of just about anything. Like my hand is a great queen cage. Often I'll be working bees and I'll have a queen in each fist. And you could still use these. You can have a queen in your fist and you still have this like thumb action where you can like pick things up, frames, all kinds of stuff. So, just don't let her out that little hole in between your thumb and the rest of your hand.
Or the one at the end of your pinky.
Totally. And don't leave her in there for too long because you could literally cook her to death in your hand. It gets pretty hot in there. Like a little piece of wire mesh or a coffee cup. Generally, the coffee cup opening is like maybe just big enough that a smaller queen could squeeze through it. So maybe like tape that and poke some holes in it instead. Yeah, all kinds of options. Most creative queen cage challenge 2021. All right, this is a push-in cage. I heard someone asking about this earlier. These are pretty complicated to use, but they're also not. You have to be able to identify emerging brood. Yeah, and it's actually pretty easy if you've never done it before. You just see the face coming out of the cell, and that's how you know the bees are coming out. And you'll see their little antenna and little perforations, and it can be pretty amazing to actually notice it for the first time if anyone hasn't seen that. And you want to pick an area on the comb that has about a third emerging brood and a third nectar and a third empty cells. The queen needs cells to lay in. She needs babies to attend to her who have never bonded to a queen before. And so those will be the ones that are emerging as you put the cage over. And she also needs space to lay. And food. So you put it over there and you don't let any other bees, you brush them all off. Don't let any other bees anywhere near it. And you have to grab her by the wings. There are a couple options. But grabbing her by the wings is the most effective. And if you can't grab a queen by the wings, that's like a whole other thing. Learning to grab a queen by the wings is a process. It takes time. You got to be patient with yourself. First, you have to take the gloves off. Then you have to, or use nitrile gloves. Switch to nitrile gloves. You can grab queens by the wings with nitrile gloves. You'll still get stung through them, but not as often and not as deeply, so it won't hurt as much, and there'll be limited swelling. But as soon as the gloves start getting stung, they'll smell like stings, and then they'll get stung more. I, as a person who never wears gloves anymore, I rarely get stung in the fingers. I used to get stung in the fingers all the time. Now I rarely get stung in the fingers because the more you go without the gloves, the more sensitivity you develop to the bees. And the more direct consequences there are to every little action you take. And when you know you could get stung at any time, you really pay a lot of attention. But you also want to stay in your comfort zone enough that you're able to move freely and breathe freely and be relaxed. So nitrile gloves are a good option. Practice on drones. That would be probably my best advice is practice grabbing drones by the thorax and by the wings. And then once you get good at that, practice grabbing workers by the wings. Because they can sting you and it hurts, but it's less nerve-wracking because it's not a queen that you paid $35 for. So if you can grab them by the wings, you can then place them gently on the comb. and then with one hand, and then as soon as you let go, get that cage over, because cutting a queen in half with the push-in cage sucks. I've done it. So be careful. And you can also put the cage just at the edge and let her run out under the cage and then set it down. Even with her attendants, if she has attendants in there, you can let them go in too, because they're bonded to her. It's okay for them to be in there. She will be less likely to be accepted if they're in there, but not by that much. So unless you're trying to requeen a very mean hive, not a big deal. Leaving her under the push-in cage for more than a day or two in an area with hive beetles can be problematic. The older worker bees that defend against the hive beetles can't get in the cage, but the hive beetles can. And they can lay eggs, and then all those helpless young bees and the queen will just get slimed out like it's nothing. So if you have hive beetles, be careful using push-in cages for long periods of time. But they are still effective. You just have to check them more often and sooner. In climates without a lot of hive beetles, you can leave the push-in cage for up to 4 days, and then you no longer have any eggs existing anywhere else in the hive except under the cage. And so you can be 100% sure that there's no other laying queen in the hive. So that's kind of nice. And if you're not sure if you can get away with it, just check it for the first couple days, the first time, and kind of see what the beetle action is like. All right, there we are. This is what they look like on. If you're using foundation, just sink the cage all the way to the foundation. You can make them out of just strips of 1/8" hardware cloth, which can be hard to find in hardware stores, but sometimes they'll order it for you. You may have to buy an entire roll, so buying it like by the club or in larger quantities, or collaborating with a commercial beekeeper, getting some from them or something like that could be good. Or someone who keeps animals like exotics in cages, reptiles or something, might have some screen like this lying around. You just want to cut it to the depth so that it can go to the midrib of the comb, whether or not you have foundation, and also leave enough room for 2 bees to stack piggyback in between the mesh and the top of the comb. You want 2 bees to be able to pass through so that the bees are not getting constantly harassed while they're underneath the screen by the other bees if they haven't accepted her right away, and also just so that they can move around freely. If you have trouble handling queens, this is a great tool to try. Little queen muff, you put your hands in there with the queen in there and she can't get away. She can fly all over the place in there and you can't lose her no matter what you do. Very handy little tool, can really increase your confidence. And then when you graduate from this, you can use the large size queen muff, which is your car with the window shut. So you can do all of your queen handling in the car with the window shut. Obviously watch for heat, but she can fly around, she's crawling up the window and you're like, oh, you're freaking up, and you're actually kind of okay. Like you'll probably catch her eventually. This is a queen clip. If you do not feel comfortable taking the gloves off at all, or if you just are scared of crushing her, or you get nervous when you get close to her, or you don't want to be stung by the bees while catching her, queen clips are great. Just use them carefully and slowly when you're chomping the bees. Like close them slowly, or you're going to end up killing bees in them. You can also store her in the queen clip like it's a cage temporarily if you want to, just to do stuff in the hive. When you do get confident to experiment with holding, if you do, it's absolutely not required. You can hold the queen either by the thorax on the sides or the thorax top and bottom. Never hold the queen by anywhere on the abdomen. Never squeeze her abdomen. Try not to even touch it. Only touch the thorax and the wings. If you're going to grab her by the wings, grab her by both wings as close to the root of the wing as you can. If you grab one wing, or if you grab the tips of the wings, she can struggle and break her own wings while trying to get away from you. If you grab the legs, a lot of people like to grab 3 legs on one side. I strongly discourage that as a technique. You can damage her foot parts that are critical in transmitting pheromone throughout the hive, and she may be rejected after that type of damage. So again, sides, top and bottom, base of the wings. If you don't feel comfortable grabbing them, I rarely grab them. I only mark them upon request. I almost always just create a cage out of my fingers this is the comb. Take my fingers and I put them over the queen, and then I slowly close them in and corral her closer so that the only place she has to go is up into my hand. And then she's in my hand cage. And I never grabbed her. And she walked willingly into my hand. And it was all very calm, and no one flew and no one stung, and it was great. And you can mark them without grabbing them by gently pinning them. So I think that's actually Sam. I think this is a picture of Sam's hands marking a queen. So you put your fingers on either side of the thorax, and you can gently press her down into the comb, and it's nice and soft and forgiving, so you don't have to grab anything. And you can mark her that way. Or there are queen marking devices with a little plunger that you can use. How are we with time?
It's 8 o'clock now. So if you want to wrap up in the next 5 minutes, that'd probably be good.
Okay.
And then we can have, 15, 20 for questions.
Cool. So I'll just throw in a few like little extra things around queens and queen handling.
Awesome.
Queen cells. When handling queen cells, be very gentle. Keep them warm. There's kind of two ways to do that. One is with an incubator. The other one is by leaving the bees on them. Whether you're moving them around on a frame, leave the bees on the frame. Don't shake the frame ever if there's queen cells on it. If you need to get the bees off, brush them instead. Try not to move cells unless you know that they're very young or very old. If they're young, they'll be uncapped. If they're old, they'll be fully drawn, and then when they're day 10, what happens is the workers start to clean away the outer covering on the tip of the cell. I need to put a good picture of this in my talk because it's better to have a visual aid, but it's like they've been scraping away a layer of cardboard or something. You can really tell that the very tip of the cell looks different. It's thinner, and it'll be even a little shorter because there'll be often an empty area that's just wax at the very tip, and it's the inner cover that is like the chrysalis she's forming inside of, and then the wax outside of that, and there's a little gap between them. So the cells often get shorter between like day 7 and day 10. They're ripe to put in on day 10 from a graft, and I like to think like maybe day 14 from the time you catch the queen, although I recently had some fully developed and emerging by day 12 after having pulled the queen. So you may want to come back by day 12. If you're creating natural queen cells by removing a queen from a colony and then coming back to harvest them and use them to make splits, I recommend coming by day 12 at the latest. 14 is the typical day that you put down, but they may already be emerged by then. So day 12 will be good. And but you don't want to take them too soon, because if you move cells between day 5 and 7, they're at a very delicate stage of development, and you can easily damage the pupa inside. Until day 10, you always want to keep them facing vertically in the same direction that they were on the comb. Once they're day 10, you can turn them sideways gently. You can lie them down. But I usually try to keep them vertical as much as I can. You can use a whole frame, or you can cut the cells off. And you can introduce them in a lot of different ways. Here I am with some just started cells. This is one of my perfect takes, I think, in 2018. This one looks a little iffy, but it did end up developing. It's not quite as long. If you graft or you have natural cells, they can all be different ages, right? So if you're grafting and you see one cell that's much longer than the other on day 2, you picked a larva that was not a consistent size. So ideally you want to pick larvae that are the same size. These are some really nice cells. I was very proud of these. They became quite large, and if you're using plastic cups, you can see inside whether the jelly has all been eaten or not. That's kind of a neat thing, and you can candle them by holding them up to the sun, which is not a thing you can do with natural cells. You want them to look nice and fat like that. Oh, video! Do we get a video? Are you gonna load? Not loading. Okay. So that was just a little picture, I guess, video of a cell that I had just put in one of my natural comb hives, and that was just a nice little. They're all crawling around and buzzing softly, and there's like birds singing in the background. I'm sure you can imagine. So that's the basics. That's pretty much the talk. So I guess we can shift to questions.
Thank you so much. That was really great. I just had a quick question that came to mind. What day do they close queen cells? What day do they cap queen cells? Day 5? Day 5 from the graft. Yeah, so it would be like... Day 5 from the graft. Okay, so it's like day 7 or 8?
7 or 8, yeah. Maybe 9. 8,
Cool.
7, 8.
Awesome. And then Paula had asked, do queens ever sting beekeepers?
Yeah, they do. I have been, I think I've been stung by a queen, but I don't think she was trying very hard. and they can sting more than once. They can sting like a sewing machine because they don't lose their stinger when they sting.
Right. Yeah, that's what I've heard. I personally have never been stung by a queen. It seems like they're not super apt to do that.
It's super rare. It's like very, very rare. But I'm pretty sure I've had them at least like put their stinger on me.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely had that with worker bees where I'm like, ow, and then I'm like, there's no stinger there, but that felt like a sting, so it's like a pre-sting sort of.
That's kind of what happened with the queen, yeah. And I think they can also, really, I don't think, they just don't have the urge to sting really that much.
Yeah.
Not with people.
They must not if you can hold them in your hands like you talk about, right? They must not be, unless you're so calm, obviously,
I mean, I hold worker bees too, and they try to sting me. So yeah.
Cool. Great. I don't think there's any other questions in the chat. Julian had gave the tip, which I took a picture of on my phone because it is hard to find that 1/8" hardware cloth, but he said that the Ace Hardware in Los Gatos has it, which is awesome. So
nice.
Nearby to us, by the foot.
That's a good tip. It's hard to find.
It's really hard to find. Yeah, I remember going to a bunch of different hardware stores and they're like, we can get you a roll. It'll be like $250 for.
Exactly.
You're like, okay, I need like this much.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah, Julian's showing that you can get it by the foot there, which is great.
That's awesome. Cool.
Cool. Cool. Does anybody else have? Oh, looks like Tim has a question. If we are grafting, how old should the egg or larva be?
Generally, graft larvae, not eggs, and you want them to be between 1 and 3 days after the egg has hatched, and so they'll actually be smaller than an egg. By quite a lot. Like when they're very, very first hatched, you can barely see them. Mm-hmm. And when you're grafting, you want them to be so small that they're translucent. Once they're opaque, they're too big. They'll still raise a queen from it, but it won't be as high a quality. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you have to choose between like minuscule, so most people can't see them that small, so you just tell them to graft as small as they can. But every once in a while, you get someone who's like really gung-ho with awesome vision and like 5 magnifiers, and they're trying to graft like the tiniest thing that they could possibly find. Don't go insane. Like graft small, but with a balance between royal jelly content. Because when they're really small, they don't have enough jelly. Mm-hmm. So you want them to be, in general, if you're like a normal human being, like graft them as small as you can. If you happen to have excellent vision, graft them a little bit bigger with more jelly, but still translucent.
Yeah. I think as Sue Kobe once said, if they're big enough to see, they're too old.
And that's true for most people, but every once in a while there's that person that's like, oh, really small? I'll show you small. And you're like, no, not that small.
Yeah. Okay, and then Julian said, you see a frame with 3 queen cells in your favorite hive that's bursting with bees. Do you do a split with it or leave it and try and catch the swarm?
You could do both. Or you could, the queen might still be in there. She's your favorite hive, like, you should look for her.
Yeah, that's
even
typically, that's typically what I do if I'm working with folks, is that if you're in a hive and you see that they're preparing to swarm and building queen cells, you can sometimes sort of like prevent the swarm from happening, or at least if you're worried that you maybe wouldn't be home to catch that swarm or whatever, you can do a split with that queen.
Yeah, you can.
So you remove the queen with some brood and larvae and put in a nook and leave the swarm cells in. Yeah,
or put them in nukes too if you want. Depending on the time of year, if it's spring, if it's summer, if you have I'm guessing you'll have a summer dearth based on how you were talking at the beginning of the meeting. Mm-hmm. So maybe not now, but maybe in April, late April, early May, something like that. Or does it start earlier than that?
Our nectar flow is really variable depending on where you live in the county, but I mean, we have a lot of eucalyptus here, and that blooms over the winter. So like people start getting swarms here in like February, March.
We've got loads of microclimates here.
Cool. Yeah, same in Florida. It's weirdly, we didn't get swarms here in Florida this year until like May. It was crazy.
Weird. Yeah, ours is usually like I usually say is like mid-March to mid-June as our swarm season, but we had some people get them in February this year, so.
Well, during swarm season, you can like get away with anything. Other times of the year, not so much.
And then Tim said, when do the nurse bees begin to put royal jelly in the cell with brood?
I think pretty much right away. But it's like when they're tiny, it's the amount that's proportional to their size. So, and also there's different types of royal jelly for different ages of larva. And so sometimes people want to like pre-moisten a cell with royal jelly before grafting into it, and it may not actually be the right age royal jelly. Not that it matters that much, but if it's not the right age, they eat it and then replace it. They don't actually leave it there. That's an interesting thing to think about.
Okay. Cool. Before we let Tucka go, does anyone have any final questions? And then, of course, tell us where people can find you. You can put, if you want to put your website or anything in the chat so people can.
All right. I don't have a website. I really should end my talks with a slide that has like my Instagram and stuff. I never use the chat. Here it is. Okay.
I will, I'll pull up your Instagram link and put it in the chat.
And are you selling queens, Tucker?
What's that?
Have you still got queens to sell if any members here want queens?
Yeah. I sell queens all season. They're gonna be mostly Florida mated. For this year, I'm not doing a lot of New York mating, but they should be. I'm thinking the Florida queens will probably be fine where y'all are.
I think so.
Yeah, but also remember, like, Florida's a long way away, and like they don't always live in the mail. I've shipped them to Seattle and California and all over. But yeah.
Do you have queens available in the wintertime?
Yeah, I have queens. So hold on, I'm gonna also put my Facebook in case there's Facebook people.
Oh, great.
I'm Tucka B on Facebook. It's not a link, but that's what you search.
I'm sure they're acclimatized to California because they don't vote, so that'll be fine.
Yeah, it's I do raise them in the winter. So I'll do a spring thing starting in like maybe January, maybe February, depending on the year and how far south my yards go that year. And then that'll go in Florida through like May, June. And then I typically take a hiatus from queen raising in the summer unless I decide to move a large production operation to New York, which I've actually only done once by myself because it's so much work to haul the bees. I often just keep my yards in New York wild and let them swarm and repopulate them through walkaway splits and don't do a lot of intensive queen raising. But I'll leave 200 colonies in Florida and let them be raising queens, and I'll buy cells from a large producer in Florida during the summer, and because I can buy a cell for $5 and sell a queen for $35, so it's still a very good profit. And they're always high quality cells, and it's a good business relationship, and they have reliable genetics. It's the Mixas that I buy them from in Groveland, Florida. And they're awesome. And so I'll come down to Florida every month to 6 weeks and sell like 200 to 400 queens, depending on how hard I feel I can split the hives. It's hard to split hives a lot in Florida during the summer because we have a pretty bad dearth sometimes, and also hurricanes. So it's safer to leave them a little bit bigger, but I can make twice as much money if I split them smaller. So it's kind of just like a risk management situation. And then I do a fall queen raising season in Florida that's abridged. Start in September with the Brazilian pepper flow into Melaleuca, and I go through like, early to mid-November. But I did successfully raise queens in December last year too. So, I mean, not that I would like routinely do that for sale because the nutrition just isn't really good enough and you have to push them pretty hard. But yeah, pretty much year round.
Okay. So, and it sounded like with shipping and stuff, with having